Dawn Walker had spent decades learning how to love people well. She was the kind of woman who pressed money into your hand when you needed it, even when she had very little herself. She showed up, she listened, and she laughed easily. Her daughter described her as a beautiful soul who would do anything for anybody. 3 children called her mom. 1 small child called her grandmother. And for 52 years, she moved through the world with warmth that people remembered long after she had left the room. In the village of Lightcliff, England, life moved at a gentle pace. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, where curtains would twitch with concern rather than judgment, and where a woman like Dawn belonged. She had found her way to Lightcliff after meeting a man named Thomas Nutt in 2019, connecting with him through Facebook before the relationship deepened into something that felt, at least from the outside, like a second chance. Thomas was 45, a scrap metal dealer who carried himself with an easy confidence. People around the neighborhood described him as one of the boys, friendly enough, the type of man who knew how to make a room relax. He and Dawn moved in together, and for 2 years they shared the house in Lightcliff. What happened inside those walls was something Dawn would not speak about freely, at least not to everyone. By the autumn of 2021, the 2 of them were planning a wedding. On the 27th of October, they married at the registry office in Brighouse. The ceremony was quiet, modest, attended by roughly 20 people. They held a reception afterward at the Prince Albert pub, and by most accounts, the evening had the feeling of a genuine celebration. Dawn appeared to be in good spirits. She smiled, she celebrated, and when the evening wound down, she and Thomas left together at 10:20, stepping into a taxi that brought them home in 6 minutes. What happened next unfolded in the hours of a night that no one outside that house would fully understand until much later. Just after midnight, Thomas was recorded on CCTV leaving the property. He had pulled his hoodie up, covering most of his face, and made his way to a cash machine. He withdrew £200 using Dawn's bank card. Less than an hour later, at 1 in the morning, he was seen in the back garden. A few hours after that, a neighbor spotted him on the back step at 5:30 in the morning, smoking a cigarette as the sun was beginning to rise. The couple had been due to leave for their honeymoon in Skegness, staying at a caravan. Thomas later described this trip as a pleasant one, the kind of low-key getaway that suited them. Dawn's children began receiving text messages during the following days. Updates about how the honeymoon was going, small details about relaxing and enjoying their time away. She told her daughter she couldn't wait to meet up as soon as she was back. Thomas also sent a message to a neighbor, mentioning a light disagreement about when to return home, saying he had wanted to be back in time for Halloween, so Dawn's grandson could enjoy the evening, and that he had to please his wife. The caravan arrived back outside the house on the morning of the 31st of October. Thomas was outside decorating for Halloween, hanging the kind of seasonal ornaments that signal a house full of life and fun. One of those decorations was police tape. A neighbor came out and asked where Dawn was. Thomas explained she had been expected to meet her daughter and grandson but had not shown up. The neighbor, keeping the mood light, made an offhand remark, asking jokingly where Thomas had buried her. His response was not what anyone expected. He became immediately emotional and began to cry. The neighbor had known Thomas for some time and had never seen him cry before. Something about the reaction felt wrong. By 12:22 in the afternoon, Thomas called the police and reported Dawn as a missing person. He said she had left the house at around 9:30 and never arrived in Brighouse. Officers assessed the situation and classified it as high risk from the beginning. One officer was dispatched to the house and upon arriving found no one there. Thomas appeared a few minutes later, saying he had just been to the shop. The officer noticed that he was heavily sweating and there was a wet mark on one of his knees. Thomas said he had rushed back when he realized what time it was. During the conversation with police, Thomas described Dawn as having been agitated before she left. He suggested she may have stopped taking medication, referencing mental health struggles. He told them the honeymoon had been spent parked in a lay-by, watching DVD in the caravan. He said he had been driving around looking for her throughout the day. Afterward, Thomas asked a neighbor to accompany him to a nearby cemetery to look for Dawn. While this was happening, another neighbor's father had noticed Thomas earlier wheeling a suitcase away from the house. A small group became aware of it over the course of the afternoon. The suitcase had been left in a nearby field and had been sitting there for roughly 2 hours before anyone alerted the police. One person approached it and opened the zip only a few inches. There was no need to open it further. The suspicion was immediate and overwhelming. Back inside the kitchen, Thomas made a remark that settled into the room like something cold. He said it was a good thing he had taken someone with him to the cemetery. Otherwise, people might think he had murdered Dawn and was out dumping her body. Then he laughed. The neighbor who heard those words felt sick. She found her way into the garden, told her partner what she believed, and the police were called. When officers reached the suitcase, what had begun as a missing person case became something else entirely. Dawn Walker was inside. Her body had been forced into the case, bent so that her face was directed toward the wheels, her legs contorted, her right leg twisted unnaturally. The forensic pathologist who examined her documented injuries that covered almost every part of her body. There was a fractured eye socket, a large black eye, lacerations to her face, a fractured nose, bruising along her neck, collarbone, and chest. Her scalp was bruised. Her jaw showed deep bruising. Her arms were bruised. Her right shoulder was grazed. There were fractures to her ribs. Her left leg had been broken in 2 places. Her bones had been deliberately broken to fit her inside the suitcase. The injury that ended her life was the catastrophic damage to her neck, with a fractured thyroid cartilage caused by forceful, sustained pressure. She had been strangled. When investigators began working backward through the timeline, the picture that emerged was one of deliberate and careful deception carried out over several days. The taxi driver who had driven them home from the reception said both of them appeared happy, and that nothing about either of their behaviors seemed unusual. But from that point forward, almost nothing Thomas had said held together. The day after the wedding, Thomas was seen outside and told a neighbor that Dawn was in bed with a hangover. Dawn, by all accounts from those who knew her well, was not a drinker. The CCTV footage of them arriving home from the reception showed nothing to suggest she had been heavily intoxicated. Neighbors who knew Dawn's routines also noted that the curtains at the house remained closed throughout the following day. The washing that had been left outside was never brought in. Dawn had always been up early, always moving, always keeping things in order. A closed curtain and clothes left on the line in autumn were not things she would have left that way. When Thomas returned with the caravan from the supposed honeymoon, he asked a neighbor to help him park it. That task had always been Dawn's. Then the CCTV footage removed any remaining doubt. It showed Thomas driving the caravan towards Skegness. Dawn was not in the vehicle. The passenger seat had bags and items piled on it. Officers tracked the caravan the entire journey there and the entire journey back. Dawn did not appear in any of it. Every message sent to her children during those days had come from Thomas. Every update about the honeymoon, every warm detail, every request to meet up when she got home, including the message sent to her daughter on the 30th, asking to meet in Brighouse the following day to see her and her grandson. None of it had come from Dawn. She had been dead since the night of her wedding. Thomas had left her body in a cupboard in the kitchen, taken the caravan to Skegness alone, stayed in a lay-by to remain out of sight, and then returned home to report her missing. Once the police officer came to the house and left, and Thomas was alone in the garden with the evidence of what he had done in the mud behind him. He went out and cleaned the marks before eventually dragging the suitcase to the field. That evening, Thomas arrived at a police station with a solicitor and told his version of events. He said that when they returned home, Dawn had told him she wanted a divorce. He said she threatened to make false accusations against him again, that she had done it before and would do it again. He claimed she had attacked him and scratched his face. He said he hit her and put his arm around her neck. He said it had felt like self-defense, and that he had not realized what was happening until she was on the floor. He described the moment her body went light. He said he panicked, not knowing what to do, and hid her in the cupboard. He said he had not meant to kill her. He said he just wanted her to stop. The history that surrounded Thomas Nutt made every word of his version harder to accept. 2 months before the wedding, a neighbor had been close enough to the house to hear screaming, unlike anything he had ever heard from a woman before. When Thomas tried to claim Dawn was having an asthma attack, the neighbor heard Dawn herself shout that he was lying and that he was trying to kill her. In August of 2021, Dawn had confided to someone that Thomas had tried to suffocate her and had only stopped when he saw blood and panicked. In the days immediately before the wedding, Dawn sent a message to a neighbor asking whether she should just leave. On the morning of the wedding itself, she was shaky and told someone she was afraid something bad was going to happen that day. And years before any of this, there was Kimberly. Kimberly had been with Thomas for 10 years. They met in 2005 at a traveling fairground in Nottinghamshire and moved in together not long after. For a decade, she was subjected to abuse that was constant, physical, controlling, and terrifying. She was isolated from her family and friends. He controlled the money. He used their children as leverage. In 2015, she woke up to find him sitting on top of her, strangling her. She fought him off, ran, and he caught her downstairs and continued the attack until one of her children, 5 years old at the time, screamed loudly enough to make him stop. He was convicted of assault that year. Kimberly was moved to a safe house and given a non-molestation order. In July of 2020, Dawn reached out to Kimberly directly. She wanted to know why Kimberly had that order against him. Thomas had told Dawn it was because Kimberly had been unfaithful. Kimberly told her the truth. She described him as someone with two sides, capable of warmth and capable of something entirely else when his anger took over. She warned Dawn. She described the way he could lose himself completely in his rage, unreachable, unstoppable. Dawn had eventually reported Thomas for domestic violence. He was arrested, charged, and held on remand because of the risk he posed. The case was later dropped when Dawn chose not to continue with it. He was released and returned to the house. Before the trial began, Thomas had spoken to a prison chaplain about the night Dawn died. He told the chaplain that Dawn had come at him with a knife for peeling potatoes and that during the struggle her hands had been broken. This was a new detail. It had not appeared in his account to police. Thomas Nutt stood trial at Bradford Crown Court beginning in July 2022. He maintained throughout that he had not intended to kill Dawn and that her death was the result of a confrontation she had started. He pushed for a verdict of manslaughter. The prosecution did not accept it. The physical reality of what had happened undermined his account at every turn. Dawn was 5 feet tall and very slightly built. Thomas was significantly larger and physically imposing. The injuries on her body were not the marks of a brief struggle with someone fighting back. They were extensive, severe, and spoke to a sustained and overwhelming attack. Her bones had been broken after death to force her into a suitcase. The forensic pathologist was asked directly whether the injuries could have resulted from a fall. The answer was that such an outcome would be extremely uncommon. The lies told in the days following the wedding were methodically exposed. The texts sent to her children, the messages about honeymoon happiness, the call to police, the performance of a grieving and confused husband, the CCTV footage showing him alone in the caravan, the clean mud in the garden, the sweating in the wet knee, the suitcase dragged through the streets while neighbors who loved Dawn searched for her and held up photographs of her face to strangers. His daughter stood in court and described watching him participate in the search for her mother, showing photographs, asking questions, playing the role of a frightened husband, while knowing exactly what he had done and where Dawn was. On the 10th of August, the jury retired. After just over 4 hours, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Thomas Nutt was guilty of murder. There were cheers in the public gallery. As he was taken from the courtroom, he could be heard muttering something quietly to himself. The sentencing followed. The judge told Thomas that it remained a mystery, why he had chosen to kill the woman he had married only hours before her death. The judge noted the impact on those who loved her, described the violence she had suffered throughout the relationship, and stated clearly that Thomas had desecrated her body by breaking her bones and forcing her into a suitcase. The judge said he was not prepared to accept that Thomas was genuinely remorseful. He said Dawn Walker had died because Thomas Nutt was a bully. Thomas received a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Within 1 week of arriving in prison, he was attacked by another inmate and treated for minor injuries. An appeal was later submitted arguing that the sentence was too lenient. It was rejected. Kimberly, who had spent years carrying the knowledge of what Thomas was capable of, had tried to warn the people whose job it was to listen. She had said more than once that she believed he would one day kill someone. She said that if her charges had been taken more seriously, a woman like Dawn might never have looked at him twice. The message that Dawn was dead reached Kimberly through a stranger on social media. A woman who had known Dawn, who reached out to Kimberly not knowing who she was or what Thomas had put her through. The message said only that he had killed her yesterday. Dawn's daughter Cody said there were no words to describe waking up every day knowing what had been done to her mother. She said she prays he is never allowed to do this to another family. Dawn's sister Lisa said he had manipulated Dawn, isolated her, and made her feel worthless before taking her away forever. She mourned for a sister who had suffered in silence because one man had convinced her that she had nowhere to turn and no one left to trust. Cody later walked the Yorkshire Three Peaks in her mother's memory on the first anniversary of Dawn's death, raising money for a charity that supports families after fatal domestic abuse. She said the charity had been a ray of sunshine during the darkest days her family had ever known. She said she wanted victims to know that there is another way, that it may be difficult, but that they are strong enough to find it. Dawn Walker was a mother and a grandmother, and a woman who laughed easily and gave freely and loved with everything she had. She had been looking for happiness in a relationship that was slowly destroying her, and she had been trying to find a way out right up until the night it was too late. The wedding day she had celebrated, the honeymoon she never took, the reunion with her daughter and grandson she had planned but never made it to, all of it was taken from her in the hours after a ceremony that was supposed to mean safety and a future. What was done to her was methodical. The lies were carefully maintained. The performance was sustained over days, and the body of a woman who deserved so much more was folded into darkness and left in a field, while the man responsible put up Halloween decorations and waited for someone else to find her. Her life was not the way it ended. Her life was her children, her grandchild, the money she gave when she had none, the warmth that neighbors remembered, the beauty that her daughter saw in her every day. That is what was lost. That is what will not come back.